premise. And Cheeks even has a line in one of the episodes, like, straight people do this all the time. If we weren't gay, this would be a hackneyed premise. And yet you take a premise like that, a classic premise, and you add one little thing, and suddenly it's important, it's fresh, it's new. There are stories to tell that haven't been told before, and it feels like time to do the show. Like, this show is so classic in its premise that it's inevitable. TV will do this show, and we just did it first.
Yeah, I think it's in the modern era, it's really the only premise that, it's the only way you can make that premise make sense anymore. You know, used to when divorce was a taboo, it made sense. Like, oh, we can't get married because, or we can't get divorced because that's not appropriate. But I mean, I think now, you know, you've got two people that champion a cause and accidentally wind up in this situation, and because they champion the cause so much, they really can't get divorced without looking really, really bad and bringing on even more flack.
Yeah, it's like Clueless was a retelling of Jane Austen's Emma, and it had all to do with class distinctions. You can't marry him, he's below your class, all this stuff that wouldn't make sense anymore unless you set it in high school, where you can't socialize outside. So it's sort of a similar thing to that, about like how to keep that premise fresh. Although we didn't start with this going like, we want to do a romantic comedy, ooh, let's make it gay. We started with, we want to do a project. Well, Cheeks had a project already in mind, sort of about young people in LA being forced to grow up, and so that was actually the premise we started with.
And what's great about it is that, as we discussed, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that they're gay or that they're famous. They're just two people trying to figure out how to love each other, which is universal and wonderful.
Well, and Cheeks and Sean, I wanted to ask you about what it's like to play a married couple. And I'd be curious how the show has sort of interacted with your ideas as they've evolved over time about what it might be like to grow up and get married.
You want to start, honey?
Well, you know, it's interesting, actually, in the filming process, Cheeks and I were kind of thrown together like a married couple that just had to make it work. I mean, we were sharing hotel rooms at all the events we went to. We stayed at the, when we filmed at the hotel, we stayed at the set the entire weekend, so we were immediately already acting like a married couple behind the scenes.
By that, he means we were fighting all the time.
But how do you feel about marriage?
I like it. Why? What do you mean by that, Sean? Yeah, I would, in theory, get married, I guess. To me, it's like so far away and unfathomable, but I'll probably blink and be 35 and be like, oh my God, I'm not married, what am I doing? But yeah, I mean, it's a nice idea. I don't really think I know anything about it, which is perfect, because we're going to do these characters, so.
Yeah, and none of us are married, and we did have a moment of hesitation at the beginning of like, what we're going to write about a marriage. We've never been young people in a marriage, but isn't that perfect? These guys haven't either. You know, we can very much imagine what the obstacles would be. And there's again, everything sort of keeps coming back to lines that are in the script already, and that now when Cheeks says about marriage, I never thought beyond wanting the right to do it. Like, there's something that's very current about that thought. A lot of people are grappling with this right now, so it's another way in which the show feels like it's right of the moment.
Yeah, and what I love about Brady is that his whole ideal of the marriage, the American dream, the picket fence, you know, I'm going to have my wife / Cheeks. And, but all of that's kind of shattered because they get married in such a way that it doesn't fit the dream, because it's suddenly two people unexpectedly together. And it's like, this isn't how I imagined it to be. But it turns out to be exactly what it needs to be.
In the best tradition of romantic comedy.
Well, and Sean, I know you in particular have done, I mean, you've done a lot of marriage equality volunteer work, and I was wondering, you know, how it feels to go from, you know, getting beyond the right to have it. And I know that you in particular, we were talking about this last night, have, you know, seen some of yourself in Brady.
I'm not as furious anymore. I In California, we had Prop 8, and so, you know, getting out in the streets and marching to the temples. I was also raised Mormon, so it's like, I'd be calling my Mormon mother and being like, just so you know, I love you, but I'm going to go march against your temple right now because you're pissing me off with what you're doing. What I love about the show, though, is that all that's behind us now. It's like, okay, gay marriage, so what? That was so yesterday. What's next? And that's what I love about the show. It just, it puts that one step behind us and it allows, and for me as a, you know, just as a person, it's like putting it behind me now as well. It's just like looking to my future. Yes, it's an inevitability that gay marriage will happen in our lifetime. So it's just looking towards that, and how and when that happens, I don't know, but it will. And so it's like, so for now, I'm just looking for my husband.
Well, and you mentioned that, you know, in the world of the show, marriage equality is inevitable, and there's a certain extent to which Husbands is in a small way science fiction, and it's a future where, you know, we're not going state by state. And I was wondering, you know, Jane, as someone who's worked in science fiction for a long time, how you see Husbands fitting into, you know, some of that sort of speculative work.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it fits in the tiniest possible way, which is that we start in sort of either future or alternate universe in which there's been this federal marriage equality law that sort of is the MacGuffin. Is it a MacGuffin? Not technically. It's an inciting incident that gets our story rolling. And so it's that sci-fi in the tiniest possible way. I mean, I spent years in sitcoms before I went to sci-fi, so sort of. There was a little Star Trek thing in there, but I come out of comedy, and I've always considered myself a joke writer. So for me, this felt a little like continuing the sci-fi, but a lot more like going back to my comedy roots and getting to sit there and just worry over a joke. And Cheeks and I taking turns like cutting a single word or changing a syllable in a joke to get the rhythm and the sharpness of the jokes exactly right. So it was more about that.
That's great. One thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is the way that sort of tropes and stereotypes play out in the show, because you have what is on the surface a couple that's a sort of stereotypical gay couple. You have one guy who's a butch athlete, you have one guy who's a fabulous queen, but the butch guy is kind of romantic at heart, and, you know, Cheeks' character is kind of commitment phobic. And I was wondering, you know, sort of how you thought about playing with those tropes, and, you know, the question of whether, when a role sort of falls over into a stereotype, and sort of where you draw the line.
Are you talking about that line from that last episode where Cheeks says, "Yeah, I'm the girl"?
Maybe a little, just a little.
Right there.
Yes, that's exactly why that line exists, for that exact reason.
And there's other moments in it. The fact that although Sean Brady proposes, it's Cheeks who's saying, I'm not willing to go forward with this as eagerly as you are, because, like, you have to make this worth it to me. Like, Cheeks is the one who needed the prompting there. So I think it's a really refreshing way of saying, like, people are more than stereotypes. Even if at first glance you think they might fit a stereotype, people are people.
Right.
And this really was, Cheeks' writing made sure that was coming through. I think all those lines were written by you that did that really fine character work.
Well, yeah, I've had experiences where, you know, I'll know somebody for 4 or 5 years, and I'll do something like, I don't know, drink a beer, and people are like, oh, you're so butch. Or I'll talk about, like, I love camping, and people are like, you're such a guy.